This episode of Liquid Assets is sponsored by HASA, the leader in water treatment solutions. HASA delivers eco-friendly, reliable, and cost-effective water care and has been keeping communities safe, one drop at a time. They've been at it for more than 60 years, and you can learn more about HASA by visiting hasa.com. That's HASA, HASA.com. Welcome to Liquid Assets. I'm your host, Ravi Kurani. Liquid Assets is a podcast where we talk about the world of technology, business, and management, all as it looks at the world of water. Today, we have an awesome guest for you. We have Brad Augustine. Brad, how are you doing today?
Hi, my name is Brad Augustine, former Lululemon and Humanscale. Today, we're going to talk about why hardware is not just hard, but it's also fun and challenging.
Doing good. Doing really, really good. Summer's coming to an end. We were chatting earlier about your whole summer camp world that you went through. It's a world I don't know of, but yeah.
It's a world unto itself. Like once you have kids, it's all about like figuring out, structuring their summer and everything around what they're going to do. But I love that, like you mentioned water and you mentioned summer, and I just can't have to think about like as those ended, it was pool.
Yeah,
so, like,
yeah.
It's a good connection.
We were chatting earlier about solving big problems that are consequential. Let's just go ahead and like jump into that. I think that's going to be the theme of what we talk about today. We'll explore a little bit about your background, which I think is extremely impressive. And for all the engineers and product managers and product folks listening out there, Brad is your guy. So definitely tune into this episode, and I think you'll enjoy this conversation. Brad, let's kind of jump into that. So what did you mean to say when you say solve big problems that are consequential? I think there's a lot of pieces in there. One obviously being problems, right? We were talking about that. So I'll let you jump into that however you want. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that from my side, as having been in product development for 20 years and worked with a variety of companies, I'm at a place where I've worked on solving interesting problems in office spaces, worked on being able to kind of adapt connected furniture with mirror and being able to kind of take fitness into the home. And so I think that there's a lot of I'm at a point where I can say, well, what do I want to be able to do? Where do I want to be able to bring my skill? And it is, it doesn't need to be commercial products. It can be bigger. And as an engineer, I think that we have a mindset of a problem-solving mindset. That's why I became an engineer in the first place. And I felt that engineering education, what it did was really solve like give you problem-solving mindset. Like all the control systems and every fluid dynamics and everything you learn is just to solve problems. And I think that is why I've stayed an engineer, or why I became an engineer, and why I stayed an engineer is because you get to do that. So I think that it's been really interesting to realize that mindset can be applied not just to like a very specific focus, but you can take a look at like how are you living in the world? How are you living in your city? How are you living in your environment and community? What are the problems? I have busy streets here in my neighborhood in New York City, and like my brain has lately been revolving around like how can technology slow down my streets so I can have my kid walk across the street. I think those are big problems, and I think that while there's a lot of companies being able to solve specific problems, sometimes those happen because you start at the big place and you start about like, well, how can I make my streets safer? How can I make and then it eventually distills down into, okay, I'm going to make this something with a crosswalk, something with a street light, something like that. So I think that it's a fun place to be able to start at what are the big problems that affect your life and affect you. And like, it's great as an engineer to realize that we have the capacity to be able to kind of solve those with kind of specific instances.
I want to touch on two things that I think are going to be kind of building blocks for this episode. The first that we kicked off with when I first met you a few months ago is this kind of adage, whatever the pronunciation is, that we talk about with hardware is hard. And I think it's important for the audience to understand your background, because you brought a very compelling product to market. I won't spoil the story, but let's kind of explore the world of Brad as you were bringing that product to life. Because I think there are elements in that lead to what you just said around solving big problems.
Yeah, so I'll kind of start back a little bit, because I think that this won't be a job interview resume, but I think that it is interesting to have kind of, I did my bachelor's, master's mechanical engineering, control systems, fluid dynamics. I was deep in just like some of the hardest part of like computational, and it was wasn't fun. And I got into, when I discovered new product development, I was like, oh, this is creativity. This is problem solving. This is what I want to do. So I kind of cut my teeth at the office product company Humanscale, where kind of got to come in, and it had a very strong sales arm, a very strong identity of what it wanted to be, a couple of really great products, but it wanted to expand. And so it wanted to be able to expand into lighting, LED lighting, height adjustable tables, and docking stations and healthcare equipment. And I got to be the one who got to engineer a lot of those products, but also be able to kind of build the teams that were able to take products from concept all the way through to mass production. And I think that this was a medium-sized company, Humanscale, and it was, I really learned the whole product development process. So privately held company, working directly with the CEO to be able to kind of define the opportunities, working with industrial design, but then doing kind of the design engineering, the regulatory, the reliability, defining these tests. These tests weren't defined. These regulatory, requirements weren't set. So it was a lot of being able to go over and figure out, one, what made sense, two, like where could we find anything that was defining something similar or that we could kind of pull from. But then, kind of setting it all up, and you build it up slowly. And to there, also had the luxury of being able to kind of figure, take it all the way to mass production. So all the NPI aspect of it, being able to choose a supplier, work with that supplier, whether it was a OEM, or a joint development agreement, work with them, review off tool samples. So I got the breadth of product development. I think that that's what I really loved. And I realized that that's my expertise of knowing that you've got all these different constraints that, that can come over and you have to navigate. And as an engineer, I realized that the fun part, and maybe this gets into the hardware is hard. The hard part to me was that was the fun part. This is me this is figuring out all these different constraints that are all hitting, and the product manager always wants it all. They always want it fast. They want it best. They want it cheap. They want everything. And as an engineer, you're the ones who realize that okay, well, these two now ram up against each other. You can't have this and this. This is me as an 8-year-old being doing these problems where 3 people are, 5 people or 8 people are at a table. This person sits next to this person, but doesn't, sits across from this person, and figuring out, okay, well, if this is this, the logic of it, then this. And I think that, I realized that was the same thing as, well, you have this regulatory requirement, you have this durability requirement, but you also want to get it market, in 6, 9 months, what have you. And so that was the logic of the hard. And I realized as I was kind of hearing a lot of people kind of talk about hardware is hard, that what it was an easy thing to say, and a lot of people cheered and yes. And I think it was a lot of people who are kind of new to that, or realizing that you can't have it all, because the engineers, because prototyping was relatively, it got easier and easier and easier to do. It was easier to make that product or have that first initial design concept that looks works like prototype, that looks like it is. But you haven't done all of that engineering work of having all these constraints hit. The hardware was hard, was being able to take this and then kind of move it into that next stage of the design engineering where I cut my teeth, which was, all right, now you have to figure out how to navigate all of these different requirements and constraints, and a lot of times they're blocking each other. So I think that is, because it's so easy here, now you're oh, wow, it's not easy now moving it to the next stage. And I think that the hardware is hard became this mantra. But I think that, to me, it's well, that was, the hardware is fun. That is the fun part. And that is actually the trick of it, because it is relatively easy to hear, but now you have to make decisions, and you have to identify the constraints, and you have to identify the trade-offs. And you have to, as a good engineer, you have to be able to present that. And you have to be able to say, okay, and this is what I work with all of my engineers on, is you can't just say you can't have it. Because executive management, product management, they hate that. The engineer's the bad guy then. But if you, at best, what you're able to do is be able to say, here's the reason why you can't have this and this. These are the constraints that are kind of working against each other. Here are some options. We can do this, and you can have this. You can do this and this. Or maybe it's even you can do this now, and then later there's a follow-up to be able to kind of reduce costing, which is, a lot of approaches. So I think that the more senior you become as an engineer, the more you realize that it's about being able to kind of not just say you can't have it, no, but being able to identify those, and then you get better and better at being able to kind of figure out kind of, well, here's what you can have, and then you like
I kind of want to unpack a few of the things you said earlier. Just kind of re-summarizing 3D printing. Some of the technologies that are out there have been able to bring prototyping, right? So you can actually see a physical object, and when we say hardware is hardware, it's like, okay, well, you can make a one of one, right? Or you can make 10 of these a day, and you can pump them out on some 3D printer or whatever that might be. But when you want to make tens of thousands of these, right, and you're trying to put them on Walmart shelves or sell them through Amazon, that's where this term that you use, NPI, new product introduction, comes to play, right? Like how do you make this in mass? And I think for the audience, we kind of have a broad spectrum of folks that may not understand the product development process. Can you maybe, as if ChatGPT terms, if you're pitching this to a 5-year-old, can you explain to me what has changed? I think you did mention that earlier. Like prototyping is easier, but like at that intersection point of when you turn from like a one of one to how do I get thousands of these on shelves? What is that process? You said you kind of learned that at Humanscale. Let's explore that a little bit.
yeah. And I realized you touched on like the excitement. Like I took it to mirror, and like that's I went back a step because I think that's kind of where I cut my teeth. Um, I think it's interesting because with prototyping, you can make tens, you can make hundreds, and like if you reach out to enough prototypers, you can probably make larger quantities. Why do people go to some of those more traditional manufacturing? There's a reason why people go to those more traditional manufacturing opportunities, and it is or utilities, what have you, or sites to be able to kind of make the product, and it's cost, and it is different materials, and it's different kind of functionality and parts, and I think that if eventually and we're getting closer and closer, like looking at rapid prototyping versus kind of traditional, say, injection molding, like these are two viable manufacturing processes, and they have pros and cons for each. Rapid prototype is very quick. There's not a whole lot of upfront investment. Injection molding is going to take longer to be able to kind of create your tools, and is going to give you different possibilities for kind of materials and manufacturing processes, and there's a lower cost. So I think that any of these ones, it is trade-offs. It's the same thing. So as an engineer, you've got to be able to you can go to your the product manager, and ideally they've given you a cost. Here's the product requirements. Here's what it needs to do from a customer perspective. They've got the voice of the customer there, but they also say, well, here's what our BOM cost has to be. And this is, as an engineer, like you can make a cheap fork, and you can make a fork that's $20. Like you can do the same functionality in a lot of different ways. So being able to get that those requirements, but also kind of here's product manager says like here's where there defines, or here's our market, here's our margin, here's what our BOM cost needs to be, and that now BOM cost, that's what really kind of defines how you're going to do it.
And BOM, by the way, is bill of materials for the folks listening out.
Yeah. Your all your components costing, all of that. So as an engineer, like this is like, all right, well, great. I know what you're going to sell it for. I know what the company. You tell me what the company needs to be able to make, kind of for it to be successful, commercially successful, and then calculate that down into here's what it is. And as an engineer, then we start unpacking. Like, all right, high ticket items are going to be this part, this part, so this part. You can do it, and then you can look for everyone. You can look for for this part here, the possibilities are rapid prototyping, they're injection molding, they are soft tooling, what have you, and you just do that for everything. So I think that there are lots of different possibilities to be able to go from that kind of that prototype that looks like, works like prototype, and then be able to say, okay, for every single one of those components that exists in there, what is how do we be able to make all these components in physical product, and then how do they fit together so that we can meet all of our product requirements. And again, this is the hard part, because it's work, and it's not just works like prototypes. With the rapid prototyping, look great, and there's a super danger in that, because when executive management sees a working prototype and they see it, and they're like, fantastic, let's get it on the shelves tomorrow.
Yeah, we're ready to go to market.
You're like, I haven't done the work yet. Like the work hasn't been done. So like, I think that it's, that's the hard part sometimes, because it is, you realize as you unpack more and more, you're like, well, there are other possibilities, and all these kind of give you different, optimize different aspects.
So let's kind of carry over your Humanscale experience over to Lululemon, which is that everybody would know about here on the podcast. What did that look like, and what did you do at Lululemon? What was your story with Mirror, and how did that go through?
With Humanscale, it was a medium-sized company becoming, trying to become a large company, and I built a team there. I had experience with kind of exposure to the startup world. My wife was working at Kickstarter kind of at the time, and so I had just like a lot of exposure to people who are making these prototypes. I realized that kind of the knowledge that I had put together and had developed, knowing kind of this full product development cycle, they didn't have awareness of. It was get a prototype, put it on Kickstarter, and sometimes they were fantastic in being able to get it out. But sometimes there was difficulty because they didn't realize, they hadn't done the commercial viability and figured out all the finances and understood the regulatory or secured a supplier. So I realized that this was something that I wanted to be able to go down to, and I could be a really valuable resource for. So I got hooked up with Mirror. So prior to being acquired by Lululemon, Mirror existed as a startup, launched in fall of 2018. Bryn Putnam, fantastic innovator, really kind of had a great idea for this product, put together a lot of different ideas on kind of what can be in terms of being able to give people access to fitness in a home environment, and created this product that really resonated with me because it was very, very, it served a need, and it really kind of was done well. And it was designed to give the kind of,
For kind of the audience, can you explain what exactly Mirror is?
yeah. So it was in the connected world. So kind of starting off like, Peloton kind of defined that at-home connected fitness type world. Mirror, unfortunately, it was a mirror that was a smart mirror that lived, was in your home. When off, it was a very well-functioning mirror. So it was hard to be able to see through it. And then when you accessed it, you can access on your phone kind of fitness content, say start it, and then there's a screen behind the mirror, and it's shown through. What is interesting is that's there's a specific aspect to the mirror, but it's really just a high-powered LCD that's kind of blasting through, and so you get the aspect of you can focus on the trainer here, but you also have a lot of the area that is being able to just show your reflection. We very, very the production facility studios had all black background, and it was filmed very well so that like the trainer kind of existed in the middle, and then you got a lot of your reflection. So you can kind of focus on both. I kind of came in there. They had a product that had just released in market, really kind of great reception. And I was the first real engineering kind of focused person there. They had some typical startups. They had, my predecessor led manufacturing, operations, quality, finance, kind of all that, but kind of was able to come in as someone who was familiar with product development process and kind of come in and really kind of put together kind of all of the engineering due diligence. We hadn't been acquired by Lululemon yet. So it was get the documentation in order, be able to, do the regulatory that was outstanding, figure out what reliability testing hadn't been done and would be asked for, that we thought would be asked for by next round of investors. So and then upgrade the contract manufacturer from the smaller facility to kind of a larger one with multiple facilities and greater capacity and greater joint development capabilities. So really came in, was able to take kind of all that knowledge of what I'd done at Humanscale and develop it at Mirror. We had a few more rounds of investment, so I was able to kind of be part of those conversations, to be able to say, this is why the product is stable. This is why we feel confident that the product is out there in the market, and then kind of work to be able to kind of create do a huge value engineering process where we took about 30 to 40% of the costing out of the product, which was great because we hit that number, and then the pandemic, like all the supply chain issues of the pandemic hit, and then kind of went back up again. So though our costing went back up, we were in a much better place than if we hadn't done that. So Lululemon acquired us in summer of 2020 and kind of let us run as a wholly owned subsidiary for a few years until they unfortunately kind of decided that it wasn't, that they wanted to focus on apparel.
Really, really cool. And I think one of the lessons I hope to kind of pull for the audience here, especially around the world of water, is going back to the beginning of this episode, right? We said kind of solving big problems that are consequential, and then tracing through your story of product development at Humanscale, and then going to kind of building Mirror and Lululemon. The folks that listen to this podcast are either thinking about working in the world of water or are in the world of water, either through like technology, building products for the world of water. And I think there's an interesting thread that I wanted to pull here of understand who your customer is, right? I feel like a lot of folks, especially in water, just kind of build like they see that PFAS is a problem, but like, have you studied how PFAS is mitigated? Right? Is that at like the wastewater facility? Is that at the drinking water facility? Like two very different customers, two very different intents. And then many times as engineers, which I feel like a lot of the water industry is, we'll just get down to solving the problem, right? You think of like the engineers that we are, backtrack 15, 20, 30 years, and you're just kind of like trying to solve the problem. But it's like, hey, look, pull your head up, run this thing up from a product development process, figure out who your customer is, and then kind of solve the problem from kind of one end to the other. With that kind of framing, do you have any advice as a product manager who has launched a very successful product from human scale all the way to like Lululemon? What advice do you have for product folks out there, for engineers out there listening to this episode?
I think that it's definitely be part of the conversation. And I think that as an engineer, it is really important to be able to get in there early and be able to ask why. I mean, there is absolutely nothing engineers, and myself included, hate more than having a product, making the product, spending years to make the product, and then it gets there and it's a total commercial flaw. And you're like, you this is your baby, you've worked on it. So, like why did it not succeed? That's just disheartening. So I think that, and that has forced me kind of my mindset more and more into, well, why are we doing this? Is there commercial viability to do this? And that is able to kind of help drive the conversation as we as engineers are going to look at, the competitive products and be able to look at kind of how they're solving problems much differently than someone with, a straight business background, coming at product management from kind of that side. So I think that being able to kind of bring that in and be able to understand how the competition works, how being able to pull it all apart, where is the technology interesting? Is it proprietary technology? Is it available? Is it, where are they putting their money in this product? All of that, like the details of what you solve as the engineering part, we can bring that into the early stage to be able to say, well, these are now the opportunities to be able to do it. So if you can be part of the conversation early with product management to like understand the problem and to make sure that product is not just running to a solution, because sometimes there's such pressure to be able to kind of generate sales that sometimes product management, they run into, well, let's do this. So the competitive product is doing this. Let's make one that is just like our version of it. And I think that as engineers, we can kind of go over and say, hold on, there might be a better way to do this. How are they solving it? And they're solving it and looking at all the constraints with money, with technologies, how are things changing? We might be able to solve it. And I think that it's a huge opportunity right now in terms of being able to figure out, like with AI advancing as much as it is, and with it robotics advancing kind of all as quickly as it is, we can now come over and we can bring some of those new solutions to those problems, so that if product just wants to be able to get something, commercially viable, we can come over and say, all right, how are they solved? Let's dig back into like what the problem is, and hopefully there's a commercial, product management, like there's a commercial opportunity. There's a commercially viable opportunity. Like here's where we can make some money. Like great, like that is kind of want to force them into that, because break the problem down into, can you make money off of it? You're profitable, company for profit. That needs to happen. So like focus on that. And who is your customer, and are they willing to pay for it? And then engineering can kind of come in with this, and design, and can kind of come in with the solution to be able to say, all right, yeah, yes, that was how it was done before, but we have these opportunities here, or these opportunities aren't going to exist. AI is super shiny right now, but it's not going to exist because you're going to have to, it's going to cost you this much more for this chip, and you're going to be out of it. So we're the ones to be able to say and analyze the possible solutions and be able to say, well, can't do this all with, a humanoid robot, because humanoid robots are so cool, but you can do it with just like, half of a humanoid robot, or like we can do it with just like, or just an arm, or just like you can, the newest AI is going to require you, like this amount of processing power, but you can do the solution with this other back way to be able to do it so you can mitigate costing and performance. I think engineering knows how to be able to like break it down into what what is the minimum, or like what really do you need to solve the problem, and then we can figure out how to optimize to that.
I love that so much because we actually were chatting about this before, and you said two things that you just touched on right now. One, to make sure that we're solving the problem, right? I think you said just don't build a solution for the sake of building a solution. And secondly, is many times product managers that come from the non-engineering side, right? That's coming from the business side, which are both needed, will sometimes drive you or drive engineers to just build the quote unquote me too, right? It was like our competitors are doing this, just go ahead and pivot, which I think leads to like the third point of circling back to hardware is hard, is you can't pivot that quickly, right? Once you've made a mold in the plastic injection molding facility, that thing took like 4 months to make, 3 months to make. You're not just me tooing another thing and then changing the mold as quickly as you can with software. I think that segues really well to something you just started to touch on. Of there is AI out there, right? It's very shiny. We have now edge based processing, right, where we can run the like large, we can basically run ChatGPT on like a remote hub, right? You don't need cloud connectivity to do that. I'll kind of pull like a water lens here really quick. Water has historically been, and it still is, very very regulated, right? Because it is a critical infrastructure, especially when you think about like drinking water or potentially bioterrorism, right? You don't want to immediately connect up your municipal water system to the cloud, and then you end up having CrowdStrike issue where you get the Windows blue screen of death, and it's like, well, now we can't serve water to our tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that depend on this, which historically are why there's these like local SCADA systems, right? They don't want to just, when the software revolution in the last 15 years came about, I was trying to sell these like connected water systems, and this is one thing that we came across, right, which is kind of why it's important to be part of the conversation when you're looking at technologies that are coming out now with like you said, use half a humanoid robot. You don't need to buy an entire Tesla Optimus, right? You don't need to buy an entire figure. Maybe just get an arm. If you're looking at AI, do you need to have cloud-based connectivity? Like, can you just talk about, and it could be within the world of water or not, just what are the interesting things that you're seeing right now from a product and engineering perspective that are new tools in the toolkit for product and engineers to look at?
Yeah, it's I think there's a lot of people trying to develop software that figures out how to define the constraints and how to try to figure out the solutions. And this is whether it's from a regulatory perspective or from a tolerancing perspective. And regulatory is always an interesting, especially if you're going global. If you're looking at, you've got these UL requirements over here, you've got these IEC requirements over here, you've got China and Japan being different, what have you. There's always a sense of like, how do I design one product that can meet them all? And this is, or adding wireless and global and like all the radio kind of requirements as well. And I think that something like water is the same, where you've got different sets of requirements. So I think that one of the interesting things that I've seen from several different companies kind of is the beginnings of how do you, rather than make this process of like trying to figure out what are all the standards that you have to be able to adhere to, and then buying this document that's 30 pages and buying this one that's 100 pages and buying this one, and then trying to figure out how to navigate it. And like as an engineer, it's like it's impossible. I remember as an early engineer, it's like who's here to be able to tell me how these all overlap? And you learn very quickly that there is no one to do that, and there's no process. But I think AI is starting to kind of come out to be able to kind of start to kind of say, all right, this, and this, these are the requirements that I have. And it's great at being able to identify those sources and compile them and be able to say, all right, everything that's related to this aspect, compile, pull, compile, and here are the different varying requirements from this standard, from this government standard. So I think that is a great tool for engineering to be able to kind of, you still have to design and you still have constraints and you still have trade-offs, but you have one of the things that it's very good at, which is taking a lot of information and sorting it. So I think it's super useful for engineering.
It's a great lead because I feel like, especially in water, there's so many regulations, so many ways. Like if there was a tool that maybe it's not a generalist tool, but like an AI water regulator sort of thing, or maybe like manufacturing, does this meet FCC or another particular regulation? Really interesting. Kind of last question before we wrap up, Brad. What's next on your list? You've done Humanscale, you've done Lululemon and Mirror. What's next in the world of Brad? What large problem are you solving?
My brain has been going to into my environment, my community. How can my products affect, at best, creating products that affect my world, affect my family. So my brain is going to continue to think on that. Over the last year, I've been kind of working with an augmented reality beauty tech startup, which has been super fascinating to be able to kind of dig into that world of AR and optomechanical and 3D displays, and take my background a little bit from mirror and kind of pull that smart mirror aspect of it and kind of bring this other aspect and just be able to kind of learn a new technology. I love just calling up every, who are all the software leaders, who are all the optomechanical leaders, and just getting on the phone with engineering because they love to talk. It's the best. It's also the other advice is just like get off an email, call up, find the engineering applications people, and just start asking them questions, because usually they will sit there and talk with you until their next. So I think that I'm still involved in that primer project, but kind of really being able to kind of take a look into how can I use my background in new product development of being able to create, whether it's consumer products or an extension for that, or physical products that can harness some of the new technology. So yeah, AI is fantastic right now. Everybody's talking about the control system. To me, as a mechanical engineer, I'm like, well, it's just the control system's changing. The box is changing. The box is getting a little bit smarter, but it's still a box to me. So like, how can that now adapt into physical products that can now address problems in our world? So I think that's, I mean, it's obviously it's very general, but like I think that's the adaptation of AI into the next round of like physical products, more than just like a phone or a device there, but like how can it like get into like whether it's robotics or other type of products. I think that's really interesting.
Really cool. Final question, actually, before we wrap up the pod, I asked this to everybody. Do you have a book, a movie, or like a TV show that has had a profound impact on the way that you see the world?
I'm going to answer that a weird way. Like I think one of the things I've been a musician since I am since I've been a kid, and I'm self-taught guitar, self-taught piano, self-taught accordion, and I think that lately it is what I've been doing. Like what is inspiring me is learning to play the piano, and I think that is right now like. So I think that there's an aspect of being able to kind of to understand the theory and understand that there's a difference between playing by like what sounds good into just like layers of theory, layers like underneath it. Well, why does this sound good? What is it does? And parsing it, pulling it apart. And every mathematician who's a musician says, yeah, that's why I love it. But I think that it's a similar type of thing. So I think that there's an object here that you can engage with, and it's great, but there are so many layers behind that, and I think that is that sort of that object where you can kind of continue playing, you can be enjoyable, but you can kind of also dig deeper and kind of figure out, why do these chord progressions sound good? It's because like there's an aspect there, or how can I play accidental or incidentals, and kind of like, why does this sound interesting? I think that there's that aspect of being able to realize that there's always something beyond what you're doing. Like it's obviously it's not a movie, but it's something that gets me doing and exploring, and I think that that's hopefully to the heart of your question.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. This was an extremely insightful conversation. Thanks a ton.
Great. Thank you very much for the time. It's great.